This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
So the author of this text, which I've been dipping into, which we're going to be dipping into this weekend, this text, the Bodhicharyavatara, Entering the Path of Enlightenment, the author of it, his name is Shantideva, his name was Shantideva, and he lived in the 8th century at the huge monastic university of Nalanda, massive monastic complex, more like a great city than just a monastery or a university. And the text of the Bodhicharyavatara, there are various translations of it which you could probably find in our bookshop, is important for historical reasons because it gives us an insight into the nature of Indian Buddhist practice in its heyday, in its high heyday in India. There's great sort of flowering of Buddhism in the 8th century in India, although, you know, quite poignantly, that was all wiped out a few centuries after by the Muslim invasion. Not much is actually known about Shantideva. We know that he was a son of a minor Raja, a minor king, from what's now Gujarat in Western India. So like the Buddha, he was from the Kshatriya, or the warrior community. At some point he left home, became a monk, and did his studies and practice at Nalanda. And what we do have about him are legends. We have legendary stories about them. You know, the scholars, the academics tell us that they're definitely legendary. There's little historical fact, but that doesn't matter. These stories are often derived from the tantric Buddhist tradition, esoteric Buddhist tradition, whatever. Whether they're true doesn't really matter because they're instructive in their own way, these stories. Now, we're told that Shantideva was not a good monk, certainly didn't look like a good monk in the great monastic university of Nalanda. In fact, he was very lazy indeed. He spent his days eating and sleeping. So there he was in his yellow robe, just dozing in his cell. And then he'd turn up for, you know, the one meal a day, or the 3 meals a day before midday for the good, you know, nosh up brought by the faithful. He didn't apparently do any practice. He didn't study very much, didn't learn very much. He'd just eat and sleep and go to the toilet. And he became a bit of a joke, a figure of fun, and all the other monks just used to laugh at him. In fact, Shantideva had a nickname, Basuku, which Basuku means something like the one who eats, sleeps and defecates, often translated as lazy bum. So the monks would just refer to him in those terms. Oh, there's Basuku. So it's like, you know, there's the one who just eats, sleeps and goes to the toilet. There's the lazy bum. That's the way they've referred to him. And Shantideva apparently was very quiet. He didn't say very much. Seemed a bit stupid. And, you know, just imagine what it would be like to kind of, those of you who live in a Buddhist community, what it would be like, you know, to be called lazy bum the whole time by your, you know, fellow community members. It wouldn't be very pleasant. But Shantideva just carried on with his life. Now, it was the custom at Nalanda that every week the king would arrive. He'd give a great food offering to the monks because, of course, he wanted to buy his way into a Buddhist heaven. He'd give a great food offering to the monks. And then one of the monks would give a discourse on the Dharma, on the Buddha's teaching. Usually this would be a commentary, a sort of standard commentary on a traditional Buddhist text, but sometimes, if the monk was particularly gifted, particularly brilliant, he'd give something fresh, something new, his own recension of the Dharma, of the Buddha's teaching. Anyway, the monks had had enough of Shantideva. They were tired of this lazy, greedy, sleeping, shitting monk, and they wanted to humiliate him and have him thrown out. So they decided that to have a good laugh and to have the king get angry and have Shantideva removed from Nalanda, they'd vote for Shantideva to give the lecture, to give the discourse. This would be good fun. They get rid of this, lazy person in the community because, of course, they were worried about the reputation of this wonderful monastery. So Shantideva was made to sit on the great teaching throne, something very, very grand, raised up, a great throne, and all the monks, hundreds of them, thousands of them gathered. The king and his attendants gathered. They'd all had the midday meal. Now it was the time for the discourse from Shantideva, and this was going to be a good laugh. So Shantideva ascended the throne, and something strange happened. He announced that he would present the Dharma in his own way. He would present something new. And so the monks thought, well, this really is going to be a laugh. He's going to talk about the teaching of how, the Dharma is eating, sleeping, and going to the toilet. And then he started, and we heard his opening stanzas last night. So I'll just read them again. So you have to imagine the scene. This monk who's about to be humiliated by everybody says, now I will give the Dharma discourse. And he says, Om, salutation to the Buddha. Bowing respectfully to the Buddhas, their sons, to the body of the truth, and to all who are praiseworthy. I will relate briefly, according to the scriptures, how the sons of the Buddhas enter the spiritual life. There is nothing really original here, and I have no skill in literary composition. I have composed this with no other purpose than to perfume my own mind. While doing this, the surge of my inspiration to cultivate what is good increases. However, if another person like myself should see this, may he benefit from it. This favourable moment, so hard to obtain, has arrived, leading to the welfare of mankind. If this moment is not utilised advantageously now, when will the opportunity come again? As lightning is seen brightly for an instant in the darkness of a clouded night, so sometime, by the power of the Buddha, the mind of the world might for a moment turn to the good. Well, you can imagine the response. They were completely speechless as Shantideva just started to give this teaching, speaking in beautiful Sanskrit verses. It would have a lovely kind of rhythm and meter to it, Sanskrit poetry. He went on in the text to then praise the bodhicitta, praise the mind of awakening, the heart, the mind of wisdom and compassion, and praising the one who possesses that mind, the bodhisattva, the being dedicated to gaining enlightenment for the benefit of all. He even had a word, it seems, an ironic word perhaps, for the king himself, because in verse 32 of the opening section he says, people honour someone who gives alms to a few people, saying, he does good, because he contemptuously supports their life for half a day, with a moment's gift of mere food. What then of the one who offers to a limitless number of beings, throughout limitless time, the fulfilment of all desires, unending until the end of the sky and those beings? So he went on and on, speaking beautifully about the bodhicitta, the bodhisattva, and how the bodhisattva practices. And of course the monks and the king were completely stunned. Who was this man? Who was this busuku, this lazy bum? Where was he coming from? Where was this coming from? What the monks didn't in fact realise was that Shantideva did all his practice at night, in the dark and silence of the night, because at that time of day Nalanda wasn't busy. These big monastic universities were extraordinarily busy places. It was actually you do find texts where the monks say that the monasteries weren't a good place for meditating in and practicing in because they were so busy. They were busy with people studying and reciting scriptures and discussing the Vinaya, the rules of training and teaching and all that sort of thing. So Shantideva did his practice at night in silence. At night he would study, at night especially he would invoke the archetypal bodhisattva of wisdom, Manjushri, Manjughosha, the gentle voice, the sweet voiced, the bodhisattva of eloquence and understanding. And the texts tell us that he would meet Manjughosha. His evocation of Manjughosha was so strong, so profound, that he talked to Manjughosha. In a way, he was Manjughosha. So in this way, the Bodhicharyavatara, the entry into the way of enlightenment, is regarded as it were divinely inspired. Shantideva just went on speaking. The Dharma just poured forth from him. And as he spoke, the legends tell us, he started to just lift off into space. So he's talking and he's just going up and up. And eventually, when he started to talk about wisdom, when he says all the practices of the Buddhas are taught to develop wisdom, insight into the true nature of phenomena, at that moment he vanished into space. And there was just this voice talking out of space. So the discourse of the Bodhicharyavatara ended with just the teaching coming from space, from nowhere. And of course the monks and the king were utterly astonished. And according to legend, Shantideva just disappeared. He kind of left Nalanda. Nobody knew where he went. Although these legends tell us that he kind of reappeared as a yogin, a wandering meditator, living among the poor in distant, neglected villages, among the so-called outcast people. And he'd teach the Dharma, teach the Buddha's teaching for those who were utterly neglected, utterly ignored. So it's a fascinating story, this. He teaches this wonderful teaching, then he actually goes and lives it, not in the monastery, but among the people. It's also a rather lovely story in that there's a great moral in it. And the moral, of course, is don't underestimate anyone. Be very careful how you judge people. You might have, I know sometimes people tell me when they come on these weekends, they kind of look around and they kind of find themselves, oh, I don't like the look of him. Oh, he looks weird. He looks a strange one. Don't think much of him. It's all kind of going on. Oh, he looks good. But be very, very careful. Tsongkhapa, the great Tibetan teacher, said, don't look down on anyone, because you don't actually know who the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas really are, who the enlightened ones really are. You do not know. So often we think we know what people are like. We're very quick to make judgments, very quick to make especially moral judgments, but we should take care. We might be dismissing someone who is very great indeed, who we could really benefit from. Shantideva's Bodhicharyavatara is very, very important for Indian and Tibetan Buddhists especially. It was very important in India. It still is very important among Tibetan Buddhists. It's a greatly revered text. And in the West too, there are many, many translations of it. I think it must be one of the most frequently translated texts, mostly from Tibetan, but there are some from the Sanskrit as well. We've got some in the bookshop. And this text is very important for us in the order and in the FWBO as well. I said last night that our sevenfold puja, our devotional practice, is taken from this text. And the first study seminar that Sangharakshita, the founder of our order, gave was on the Bodhicharyavatara. The text is obviously a great inspiration to him in his own practice. And, it's affected us very strongly because within our order, within the FWBO, this ideal of the Bodhisattva, someone dedicated to the enlightenment, not just for themselves, but for the benefit of all, is really the spirit of our order. It's the spirit that we really try to live up to and we derive inspiration from. Since 1989, the Bodhicharyavatara has been studied on the men's 4-month men's ordination course at Kukuloka. So it's studied every year. after people become ordained on the intensive ordination course at Kukuloka, they go through the Bodhicharyavatara, and it's quite an intensive thing to study in the environment of a 4-month retreat. And some people have found it really quite difficult indeed. I found it difficult myself, because Shantideva pulls no punches. He's extremely direct, and he paints things very, very vividly indeed. But whenever I've led study on it, whenever I've gone through it, I've found that I'm dealing with really a manual for someone dedicated to the practice of the Dharma, someone intent on gaining enlightenment for the benefit of all. That's really what it's concerned with, and it's concerned to look at and expose particularly our self-centeredness, our self-centered attitudes. That's really what Shantideva is concerned with. He's trying to sort of show all the different ways that in which we're selfish, and how we can move beyond that. I found as well, whenever I've studied it, that it's very, very much a very good manual for those of us, involved in the order, who want to be part of the order. I mean, I found myself finding that so many examples in explaining a particular passage from Shantideva, I was using examples from my experience of interacting with other people within our movement. I found that especially when looking at the Kshanti Paramita section, the section which is to do with the perfection of patience and forbearance. You need a lot of patience and forbearance if you're going to be part of a spiritual community. Well, if you're just going to live, you need a lot of patience. If you come into any meaningful relationship with people, you need a lot of patience. If you're coming into a profound, meaningful relationship with someone, with anyone, and the Sangha is full of anyone's, all types of people, and they're not all your favourite kinds of people, you need a lot of patience. You might even have started to experience that this weekend. But let's come back to our theme, our weekend, the theme of this weekend, the alchemy of happiness. Yesterday, I quoted that verse 10 from the first section, which goes, having taken this impure form, the bodhicitta transforms it into the priceless form of the Buddha. So, hold fast to this precious gold-making quicksilver elixir, known as the bodhicitta, which must be thoroughly worked. So I said that what we would be doing, we'd be looking at the way in which the bodhicitta, the quicksilver elixir, works on us, works to transform our ordinary human experience, our ordinary human form, into the priceless form of the Buddha. And it's with our ordinary human experience, as I said last night, that we have to begin with. We have to start with ourselves as we are, and life as it is. You can't work any kind of transformation by pretending that things are other than they are. We have to deal immediately with our actual situation and circumstances. Looking around this weekend, as one does, I noticed that we're all very different people from all kinds of situations and backgrounds. I've talked to a few people already this weekend, just a handful of people, and each one, is from such a different background, such a different person, different ages, different circumstances, different life experiences. But if we were to boil everything down, as it were, if we were to strip everything back, what is our situation? What do we know? What can we know? Well, what we can know for sure, what we can all know for sure without any argument or debate, is that all life ends in death. We can be completely sure about that all of us here will one day die. That we can be sure of. We can also be sure that death can come at any time, at any moment. Integral to our experience of life is the fact, the bald fact, of its ending. Nobody has actually cheated death as far as we know. Death will happen. Our life will end. And somewhere, on some level or other, we know that. We know that. We sense it. We rarely want to look it in the face. We rarely want to do that. We rarely want to take it on. But on some level, the fact of death, of our death, is having a seismic effect upon us. Perhaps the main effect of death, when you actually start to, take it on board, perhaps is the whole issue of meaning. What is the point of it all if life ends in death? If everything passes, if everything changes, if everything ends, then what? What is living for? Now, the themes of death and impermanence and death, pervade Shantideva's Bodhicharyavatara. I think that's why it can be a very, very uncomfortable text. In whatever section you read, you're never very far away from some kind of reflection on death and impermanence. He keeps coming back to it, keeps referring to it. In the second section of the Bodhicharyavatara, entitled Confession of Faults, we find some of the most simple, poignant, and indeed powerful expressions of our actual situation. In the first section, I've read verses from that, the first chapter, Shantideva gives praise to the bodhicitta, the enlightened mind. And that praise in the second section, Confession of Faults, turns into beautiful, elaborate devotional verses. We have some of those in our own puja. But then, after that, Shantideva confesses his faults. You get the impression that Shantideva himself has had some kind of experience, some kind of vision of the bodhicitta, this amazing heart, this amazing mind of wisdom and compassion. He's got some kind of contact with it. He's been moved by it in some way. It's touched him. But as well as that causing him great joy and great uplift, it also reveals to him how much of him just isn't in tune with it. The vast heart of enlightenment, of awakening, reveals all the pettiness, all the small-mindedness in us. And Shantideva sees that small-mindedness in the context of life and death. I'll read you some verses. First of all, the confessional verse. Whatever wrong I have done to the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, to my parents, to my teachers or others worthy of respect, whether wrong by deed, word or thought, I confess it all to the leaders. I acknowledge it all to the leaders, to the Buddhas. And then he says, the Lord of Death is indifferent to what has been done or not done. Like a thunderbolt, he strikes me down in health as well as sickness. For the sake of my likes and dislikes, I have done many kinds of wrong. I did not remember that sooner or later I must depart this life, abandoning all and alone. What I hate will cease to be. What I love will cease to be. I will cease to be, and all will cease to be. Amazing reflection on death. What I hate will cease to be. What I love will cease to be, I will cease to be, and all will cease to be. It's a very powerful verse. And you notice Shantideva doesn't console himself with the notion of rebirth. He definitely believed in rebirth. We know this, as many Buddhists do. And sometimes, people talk about rebirth as sort of consolation, that, in my next life, as though we, as we are now, are just going to go on and on. But he doesn't do that. Here, we're presented with something raw. Shantideva is facing up to the actual feeling, the existential situation, as you contemplate death. You end, I end. Beyond that, actually, we know nothing. Death is the great mystery. We do not know what happens after death. Which means, of course, if we don't know what happens when we die, then life itself is a great mystery. What do we do with it? So I think this is the first thing we need to do, to work the bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, into ourselves. We need to ask ourselves the question, what am I doing with my life? What is my life for? What is life for if it ends in death? If it takes place in the shadow of death? This could sound morbid, it could sound heavy. Actually, it's neither. It's just facing the actual facts of our situation. As the great Dogen says, impermanence is a fact before our eyes. Dogen says, you don't have to kind of conjure up any fancy philosophy or anything like that. It's right here and now. We're born in the morning and we die in the evening. Reflecting like this has such a tonic effect, I find. So much of what I get bothered by, what I get concerned about, what I get wound up about, is really utterly superficial, completely unrelated to the basic facts of life and death. As I notice this sometimes, I'm off on something, some concern, some irritation, some anxiety, and when you kind of look at it in the light of life and death, you think, what a waste. I noticed this quite vividly around this time last year. Last year at the end of August, my father died. He was very old and unwell, and it wasn't unexpected, his death. And I loved my father very, very much. And for some months after he died, I entered a strange sort of place. I found that I couldn't think, or rather I couldn't relate to many of the things that I usually do. So much seemed utterly irrelevant. I didn't feel depressed. In fact, looking at it, part of me, looking back, it was almost as if part of me was sort of in the realm of the dead with my father in some way, kind of seeing him through. But so much, the main thing, there's so much in ordinary life, so many of people's concerns, what people wanted to know about, what they were concerned about, seemed pointless. Meaning was in the experience of mourning my father's passing, of fully acknowledging his passing. Meaning was in the experience of meeting people heart to heart, they as they are, as living, breathing beings. Meaning was in things like the fact of looking at leaves in the sunlight or listening to birdsong in the early morning. Meaning was in these things. So much else seemed like empty noise. And in the course of this weekend, I don't really mind if the effect of this weekend is that you get more into Buddhism or you don't get more into Buddhism. But I would be really, really pleased if the effect of this weekend is that you asked yourself questions about what your life is for. We're not given very long in this life. So let's not waste what we have. As my dear old dad used to tell me when I was upset and angry as a little boy, he used to say, son, don't get like that. Life's too short to waste on those things. So I was getting an early teaching on impermanence from my old dad, even in those days. But I remember it very, very vividly, this phrase of his, life's too short for that. And it was usually if I was annoyed with my sisters or something like that. So yes, if this weekend has the effect of you asking questions about yourself, that would be really satisfying and pleasing to me. Shantideva's perception of death and impermanence is extraordinarily profound. It's not simply the notion that one day he will die. His sense of impermanence is in fact a sense of the momentariness, of the fleeting nature of all experience. The verse that immediately follows the one I've just mentioned goes, everything experienced fades to memory. Everything is like an image in a dream. It is gone and it's not seen again. Everything experienced fades to memory. Everything is like an image in a dream. It is gone and it is not seen again. This is happening right now as I speak and as you listen. This whole perceptual situation of me speaking, of you listening, of thoughts going through your mind, of images flashing through your mind, of feelings and emotions going through you, of the sounds all around you, the movement in the room. It's just immediately becoming memory. Immediately becoming memory. It just flashes past. A friend of mine who's an artist, I was talking to him about, he had a still life in his room which he was drawing, and we were talking about life drawing, drawing a still life. He said, well, you've got to remember, you're always drawing from memory. You know, by the time you've looked and put down the mark, you are drawing a memory. You never get the thing in itself, which is an amazing thought, if you think about it. We can never catch and grasp what is actually going on. All experience is like quicksilver, like mercury. Life itself cannot be grasped or held. If we were to look and examine, if we were to search, we'd find no permanently abiding essence, whether inside ourselves, in other people, in anything. Everything, Shantideva would say, is empty of self-nature. Everything is shunyata. Everything is emptiness. It doesn't mean that there's nothing. It doesn't mean that there's, in reality, some vacuum, some blank nothing. That's not what Buddhism says. There is, of course, we know, we're experiencing it, a vivid appearance. There is experience, but we won't find any essence in it at all. Only, the texts tell us, the Buddha tells us, a dependent arising, a flow of ever-changing conditions, just running on, just flashing past. Even the conditions themselves, even the moments themselves are insubstantial. So they go further and they say everything is like a dream, or everything is like Maya, which in this context means illusion or a magical display, vibrant, vivid, clear, creative. All is transformation, always moving on, always changing. This vision of life, this insight, is in fact the ultimate nature of the bodhicitta itself, the awakening mind itself. Ultimately, this bodhicitta is the voidness, the emptiness of all things. The so-called relative bodhicitta, I'll have more to say about this tomorrow, is the mind of love and compassion for all beings expressed in actual deeds for actual people. The aim of the spiritual life, according to Shantideva and others within his tradition, is to realize these two aspects of bodhicitta. The ultimate nature of things, which is insubstantial, illusory, empty, perfectly combined with love and compassion for all beings. A 10th century master named Atisha, very instrumental in kind of bringing about a renaissance in Tibetan Buddhism, another Indian teacher, speaks of the aim of the spiritual life as shunyata karuna garbha, which means the essence of emptiness and compassion. That what you're doing in your spiritual life, what you're trying to do, is to see this insubstantial nature of things and have that perfectly blended, perfectly integrated with love and empathy for all others. This is why, by the way, we place so much emphasis on the two meditation practices, the mindfulness of breathing to develop awareness, and the metta bhavana to develop friendliness and loving kindness. That's the basis for the development of these two aspects of the enlightened mind. But the point I really want to make here is that the Buddhist vision of transitoriness, impermanence, insubstantiality, of emptiness, of illusoriness, doesn't bring about, when you see it clearly, a kind of depression or hopelessness or sorrow. That insight is, in fact, the key to spiritual alchemy. It's why spiritual transformation can happen. And it's interesting, here we have a kind of alchemical transformation as well. Death and change we usually see in terms of loss as very unfortunate things. But here, if we really face up to death, if we really see impermanence as it is, we transform our attitude to it. We see it as the key to creativity and fulfillment. We can transform ourselves, we can turn ourselves from man into Buddha, because life itself is transformation. To begin, just to look at, to take on the fact of change, is to begin the great work of spiritual transformation. To just entertain the notion of change is to start to melt our fixed and solid ideas about who we are and what life is. Just to ask questions is to light a flame beneath ourselves. Just to meditate, to attempt in the Metta-bhavana to turn dislike or indifference into love, into friendliness, just that is to take on in some way the fact of change, the fact of the changing nature of things. We light the flame then, and we are sitting in the alembic. The bodhicitta is being worked. We're beginning to melt. Just to ask the question, what am I doing here, is to start the process. Just to start the question, just to frame the question, what is life for? What is life? Is to start the process of transformation. Questions are powerful. The great Indian master Aryadeva, a kind of spiritual great-great-great-great-grandfather of Shantideva, once said, the nature of existence, or the nature of life, is it empty or not? Merely to feel this doubt tears samsara asunder, tears the ordinary world asunder. So just to feel that doubt about the nature of life, the nature of experience, if you really do it properly, will bring about a cataclysmic change. So the bodhicitta is worked, first of all, by asking ourselves what we are doing, by considering life, by considering death, by opening up to the transformation all around us. What happens as a result of that we'll see tomorrow. We'll see a bit later on. We'll go into that tomorrow. Of course, the huge implication of all this, of talking like this, is that it means that if you do start taking on the bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, if you do start to work that on yourself, it means really that you have to be ready for anything. Because anything could happen. You never melt predictably. You never melt predictably. You might think you can predict the way you're going to melt, but you can't predict it. Anything could happen. But I think it's time I stop there and we can break up into groups and you can start to chew all this over. Thanks very much.
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you.